Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Angela Puca and welcome to my Livestream symposium. For those of you who don't know me, but I guess most of you do, I'm a PhD and a university lecturer, and this is your online resource, my YouTube channel that is, for the academic study of magic, esotericism, paganism, shamanism, and all forms of religious traditions or forms of spiritualities that include some form of magic. That is my specialty, basically, as a scholar. So I can see that there are some of you already here, guys. Before I start addressing you all, I guess that I want to celebrate the 40,000 subscribers here on YouTube. Thank you so much, everyone, for supporting my work and subscribing to this YouTube project that I created 2.5 years ago. As a last year PhD student. Now, of course, my PhD is done. Yeah, I'm really, really happy that you guys are appreciating my project. It means a lot to me. And I also appreciate the support that I get from people from my Patreon community, my inner symposium, that I can see already some of them here, which I'm going to mention in a few seconds. And so, of course, this project can only exist thanks to your support. So everybody who pledges to my Patreon or joins memberships here on YouTube or sends one-off PayPal donations, everything really helps to keep this project going. So thank you so much for your support. In any way, shape or form you can provide it, because it is a project that is supported by you guys, and I think that it means a lot for the community, I hope, and even for the academic field of Historicism to see that there is interest in the study of this subject matter. I remember that when I first started, it seemed like nobody was, especially practitioners were quite surprised that there was academic scholarship on the matter. So I hope that my channel is giving a small contribution to make this more known. Also, something interesting that happened this month is that I went to an event called Quantum Souls, which you may have seen the recording of that. And, I was explaining the pagan wheel of the year, and more specifically, Ostara, the spring equinox here in the northern hemisphere. That's what has been happening lately. And yeah, it's interesting, to address the wheel of the year and the changes and the rebirths that you see according to the wheel of the year in November. So Novembers can be life-changing. So that's a thing to bear in mind. So let me now see your comments. Oh, hi, Andrew. Andrew is always the first. Thank you. And hi from New Zealand. Well, hi to New Zealand. I'm from the UK. Yeah, I'm based in the UK at the moment. So hi from Northern England to you in New Zealand. And hi, Davlavi and Edward Iglesias. It's nice to see some of my patrons from my inner symposium here. Hi, Andrew Penner and Hank. Hi, Inquisitor Vex and Jeanette Waverly. Fata Morgana, are you Italian? Fata Morgana is an interesting, I think it was quite popular in the 2000s as a nickname as well for pagans. Hi, Lady Kefera and Gothic Extravaganza. Oh, hi, Joao. An ugly weirdo. I'm sure you're not ugly though. Hi, Gunshi. Good evening, Dr. Puka and everybody. Oh, hi, Thomas Dolcelli. Yeah, this is as per usual. I'm trying to have one of these each month, and the idea is to sort of answer your questions. Of course, I always promise that I'm only able to answer questions provided they fall within my expertise, and I can answer them from an academic point of view, so not as a practitioner. Although I can tell you, based on my fieldwork, whether there is a specific trend among practitioners, but I don't really advise in terms of spells and curses and summoning demons. You would not imagine the emails and the messages that I get. So for some of you, this premise may seem kind of surprising or unnecessary, but I assure you that it is. Oh, hi, Sean. I haven't say hi earlier. Oh, we have a first question. So yeah, of course, just bring your questions to me and I will try and answer them. And if I'm not able to answer them, I will say that I'm not. Oh, hi, Nick Tillman. Nice to see you in the chat. And hi, Exploration Arcanum. So let me get on with the questions. So the first question is from Inquisitor Vex. Have you seen Survive the Jive's latest video on the future of paganism? No, I haven't. Is that something specific that sparked your interest and you want to share? Maybe I can tell you what my opinion is on the matter. Hybrid or Ubrick, I don't know how to pronounce it. David says, always fashionable, Angela. Thank you. I also booked my flight to Cork, Ireland for June, July, because I have two conferences there. One is the European conference, to make it short for people who are not academics. Among academics, we call it the EASR conference, which is the Conference of the European Association for the Study of Religions. And then there's also the SW conference, the European Society for the Study of Western Historicism conference. They will be both held at the University College Cork. So it's interesting. I will have a paper for the European conference on Hecate and new representations on social media. I'm planning on focusing on TikTok and maybe other social media. I will start working on my paper shortly, in the next future. And the second paper for the SW conference will be on Lucifer and representations in pop culture. It will be interesting. I will have to start working on these papers in the next few weeks. So let me see if there are other questions. Gothic Extravaganza says, do you have D20 within reach? If so, will you roll and tell me the number you get? I don't know what is D20. I'm sorry. Oh, Nick says to Andrew, good to see you. They are both my patrons. I hope, by the way, this gives me seeing all of my patrons here just gives me the chance to say that next Sunday we will have the lecture, the monthly lecture for the Magus level patrons, and it will be on tarot. And there will be a very special guest on this specific one, which is my best friend. He's like the person that knows the most about about tarot, and he's also an artist who works in Tuscany and has a degree at the Academy of Fine Arts. So and has created his own tarot deck. I hope I can say it and he won't get mad at me. But yeah, I'm quite pleased that I will get the chance to introduce him to my patrons, to my Magus level patrons for that event. Let me see if there are other questions. So Villain Noir says, I'm interested in witchcraft, but I'm not white, Asian, so I'm worried about cultural appropriation. What do you think of it? Cultural appropriation. So that needs to be a video. It's one of those videos like the one on Stregheria that sort of takes me a bit of zen to kind of make a video on. But I wouldn't say, you shouldn't be worried about practicing witchcraft as an Asian person. I don't say it is cultural appropriation at all. I want to lay out my argument in a video, but the matter of cultural appropriation is quite, it's complex, but I think that it tends to be used and thrown around without proper context sometimes. I have seen a very interesting lecture on cultural appropriation, which I think is the best one, and I will definitely be mentioning it in the video that I will be making on cultural appropriation, which you reminded me. I want to make that video soon. I wouldn't say next week, but possibly within the next month. I really want to address that. And there is a video on the YouTube channel of Harvard University, Harvard Divinity School, and it's a lecture by Sabina Maiocco, a professor that I know. She teaches at the University of British Columbia, if I'm not mistaken, and it was a brilliant lecture on cultural appropriation and explaining, what can classify and what cannot classify as cultural appropriation. But as I said, I think I want to lay out my argument pretty well, so please bear with me and wait for the video. It's not gonna take long anyway. So, but I can say that what do I think about it? You can definitely practice witchcraft, even though I know that now there's the discourse around witchcraft is that the term witchcraft is sort of related to a European tradition, or European perhaps folk magic kind of tradition, and that's interesting because the meaning, I know that there is this conversation going on within magic practicing communities, but what we mean by witchcraft has changed a lot over the years. So what counts as witchcraft now, I guess, would be also an interesting topic, and it depends what kind of methodology you want to use to define that term. I sometimes use in my research something called discourse analysis, which is based on Foucauldian philosophy and methodology, which means that I sort of collect data from practitioners, and I base my definition on patterns emerging from the discourses created within the community. So I don't try to overimpose a label or a definition that comes from somebody else. Of course, I will base, my theories on other scholarship and other scholars to support the theoretical ground for my methodology. But I tend to lean more towards defining things by seeing the underlying and overarching patterns, which means that the definition that you get will not be endorsed by every single practitioner, but will be overall representative of what is going on generally within the community. Every time that you make a general statement, if you try and be accurate, of course, a scholar wants to be accurate, but every time that you make a general statement as accurate as it can be, because your methodology perhaps is suited to that specific intent, it will never represent the individuals and every single person's opinion. It still tends to be a representation of patterns. And but patterns are important when in social science and in social studies, because what social science has shown is that individual behavior is highly unpredictable, but group behavior is actually predictable. So that's fascinating, because it means that when individuals work and think and act within a community, their behavior starts to work in according to certain patterns. So studying the group and the community can give you a pretty accurate representation of how the individual will also behave when they relate to that specific context, to the community context. So I hope that sort of answers your question. So, Gothic Extravaganza, maybe you were referring to D&D. There's a friend of mine who's also a colleague and a philosopher. Unfortunately, she's leaving our department to go and teach in Cambridge. Well, good for her, but I'm sorry that I will be missing her. But she is a D&D player, so... But yeah, I have never played D&D, but it's one of those things that I'd like to do in the future. And I'd also like to make a video on D&D, on magic in D&D, but there is no scholarship on the matter. And I'm very stubborn in the methodology that I use for my videos, which means that the content of my videos is based on peer-reviewed scholarship, which makes the content that I can address quite limited, because if something has not been studied yet by scholars, peer-reviewed publications, then I cannot talk about it on my channel unless I do the research myself and it passes peer review, which is something that I've also done. But yeah, up until now, that's the methodology that I've been using for my videos. So unless I change my mind on that in the future, I think we will need to wait for some scholarship on D&D. I think that there is something there are peer-reviewed papers and studies on D&D, but not in religious studies, not in terms of magic and the use of magic and these kind of things. I think there's something in psychology, if I remember correctly. So, Villain Noir says, I'm interested. Oh, I have already read that one, sorry. Oh, Nick Tillman is asking, have you thought about doing a video on German, Pennsylvania Dutch brujeria? I'm not sure how it's pronounced, I'm sorry. I'm curious if it might have some points of convergence with the segnature in Italy. Yeah, that would be an interesting video to make. I can already tell you, Nick, that when I go to conferences, or when for instance, I gave a lecture at Stockholm University a month ago or a couple of months ago. I've lost sense of time. But there were other scholars. My lecture was on the tradition of segnature in Italy, and there were other scholars there in the audience that were also studying folk magic practices in Europe. And on that occasion, as well as in other occasions where I presented papers on the matter at conferences, I've always had scholars approaching me, researchers approaching me and saying, Angela, I'm studying something very similar. I'm studying folk magic in this specific country, and there are a lot of similarities or parallels, and we start talking, for hours, and they tell me, in this tradition, there are these things happening and these other things happening. So my impression, my educated opinion here is that it could be indeed the case that it is a European, something that you find across European countries. And as a consequence, it could have been also imported in the US from Europe. So I'm not sure whether it is, there are similarities to be found in every single country in Europe, but I'm sure that there are similar traditions in Switzerland, the Republic of Moldova, Poland, Germany. There are a few others from Eastern Europe that were also mentioned to me. But yeah, I have at least, a few countries from Europe, especially Central, Southern, and Eastern Europe, that seem to have folk magic traditions that have common patterns. And they present basically quite the same or similar pattern to the tradition of segnature that I systematized in Italy for my PhD. So I think it would be interesting to have a European kind of research on the matter, so that different scholars will investigate, will have their fieldwork in different countries, and then sort of compare and contrast field notes. But I imagine it would be difficult to find funding for a research of this kind, but it would be interesting because I think that there is something there. There is something there, and it could sort of shed a light on European witchcraft at large. Is it like in my research, I systematized it as Italian witchcraft, and I will be publishing it as Italian witchcraft. But is it perhaps the case that it is European witchcraft with Italian variations or German variations? Of course I don't know. I don't have data to infer that. At the moment I can only say that I have systematized the Italian tradition. It needs to be systematized, even if in the future it may be the case that things change and evolve and we get new data and knowledge gets updated. That is fine. I never think that my research is supposed to represent the truth or anything. I think that every researcher wants to sort of add a building block in the in the endless wall of knowledge which is also a moving target, as I always say to my patrons. Oh, thank you, Hank, for your donation. Thank you so much. So to answer your question, Nick, it was a very long answer to your question, but yeah, I'd like to make a video on that if I find data and research that I can use for the video. That's my main perplexity. I'm not sure whether there is any data. If I go at the European conference, so I will hunt this information for you. When I go at the European conference, I will try and see whether there are scholars doing research on folk witchcraft, on folk magic in Germany, or other folk magic traditions in Europe, and perhaps I can invite them as guests on my YouTube channel, so they can talk about it. That would be interesting, I think. I already have a video on folk magic in the Republic of Moldova with Dr. James Capello, and in that one you can already see some parallels with the Italian tradition, which we were in a conversation and I also mentioned them. So yeah, if I manage to find some scholar that is doing research on that, I will hunt them down and say, let's do an interview here and now. I will be sort of hunting people with my camera. I'm gonna be the influencer of the situation. I'm actually bad at doing this kind of things, guys. I mean, even when I was at the last European conference in Pisa, I felt very self-conscious to film stories for Instagram and these kind of things. It's not something that academics usually do, so it's like it felt like I was strange. So I would just go and look for the some angle where nobody was there and trying to film something for you guys. But I shouldn't be as self-conscious, but I am. So Joao is asking, how familiar are you with this quote? Without the dark, there can be no light. We have purpose. Without the lie, there can be no truth. We have purpose. In celebration of the 40,000 subscribers. It sounds like a quote that kind of represents me, I think. I mean, my way of seeing things, but I'm not sure whether it is a quote from a specific thinker or a specific game. Do let me know, Joao. Yeah, but I like it. Without the dark, there can be no light. We have purpose. Without the lie, there can be no truth. I like that. Let me know where it comes from. Then David Kirby is asking, any forthcoming presentation on Gematria? Not forthcoming, I wouldn't say. It's not something that I am working at the moment. If you're interested in the matter, I think that perhaps Justin has a video on that on the YouTube channel Esoterica. I'm sure that most of you are familiar with his work, but in case you aren't, it's a great channel. It's a great YouTube channel. I think he may have something on that. And also you may look at Religion for Breakfast. I have a vague memory of some gematria there, but I think I remember clearly watching a video on the 666, you know, the meaning of the number 666, which actually refers to the Emperor Nero. But yeah, I'm sorry, it's not something that I will be working on in the short term. So let me see if there are other questions. Gothic Extravaganza is asking, respectfully, okay, do you know anything about sexual encounters on the astral plane? Interesting. I think it's difficult to answer that question because it really depends on what counts as astral plane, because as I mentioned in my video on astral plane and astral travel, it is actually a pretty recent concept that comes from Theosophy and was also developed by the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And I think it would be perhaps more accurate to distinguish between astral travel and out-of-body experiences. Because I think perhaps astral travel can be something, I think that practitioners often collate the two things into the same thing, into the same concept, which sometimes can make it a bit confusing. I mean, what is the astral plane? Is that one specific realm of reality, or is it just whatever happens when you are outside of your body, when you are having an out-of-body experience? So I think that it makes it a bit confusing. But in terms of sexual encounters, I think that there is the belief that incubus and succubus can have encounters with human beings, but is it on the astral plane or is it in dreams? That's another matter. You know, sometimes there's also a sort of collapsing together also the concept of experiences that practitioners have during the dream state with astral traveling. So I think that sometimes the matter of astral traveling and astral plane tends to be a bit confusing when it's not specified more clearly. But yeah, there are practitioners that say that they can have that report having sexual encounters in an out-of-body experience, and there are also entities like the incubus and the succubus that tend to, that have that kind of sexual element to them. Oh, hi, Justin. Thank you for coming along. I was just mentioning your channel. I don't know if you heard that part or not. So you're saying, can stick around today, but wishing you a great day. Many thanks for your scholarship, and that everyone should consider supporting Angela on Patreon. Thank you, Justin. You're always very kind, and I'm glad to see you in the chat. And yeah, for those of you who don't know Justin's work, I highly recommend subscribing to his YouTube channel, Esoterica. I just watched your video on Paracelsus or Paracelsus, and I really liked it. And I think I have to look more into the doctrine of the signatures, just to see whether there are some parallels with the tradition of segnature, which, you know, the name itself seems to have some resemblance, but I'm not quite sure whether there is really anything there. In terms of, you know, historical development, it's also quite difficult because there's such a big historical gap. But I'm still interested in diving deeper into that. So thanks for coming over, Justin. Oh, Hank said, 40,000 subscribers, buy yourself a gelato to celebrate. Yes, I guess when I go back to Italy, I will eat a lot of gelato. Gelato would be like ice cream in English, I guess. But yeah, we have a tradition of gelato. You know that Italians are obsessed with food, so we have a tradition for every single kind of food. I should be better at cooking for being an Italian, but I'm not that good at all. Let me see where I was at with the questions. So Donhab is asking, can you speak on the stigma the horned god has gotten in modern times since Christianity? The stigma of the horned god derives from the works of Margaret Murray. One of these works is the God of the Witches, which inspired Gerald Gardner in the foundation of Wicca, of the Wiccan tradition, and has since then been highly disproven, clearly disproven by other historians, one of whom is Professor Ronald Hutton. And so, it's a bit complicated because the way Margaret Murray talks about the horned god, she talks about it, if I remember correctly, as this sort of male entity that was then sort of taken by Gerald Gardner to because that in Wicca you have the goddess and the god, and there are these two polarities that Wicca works with in their perception of the deity and the divine. And so there is some historical truth in the sense that there have been pagan deities and pagan gods that have been that have become demons, but that is not always the case, and it is not one god, it is not one horned god, it is multiple gods. And but that is not just something that happens with Christianity. This also happened within pagan religions. It was actually quite common that the gods of the others, of the neighboring countries or the neighboring religions, sort of become demons. So the process of demonization of the gods of the others is not something that is peculiar to Christianity. It's something that has happened over and over. And it's one thing that I usually say is that demons have often been, not always, but there have been quite a few cases where demons are the gods of the others, and witchcraft is the religion of the others as well. Or rejected knowledge, as Wouter Hanegraaff, the professor at the University of Amsterdam, he defines Historicism as rejected knowledge, sort of the wastebasket of knowledge in Western history, which sort of refers to, you know, all the elements that in the European history have been neglected. You know, when you study Descartes or Newton, you don't study the esoteric interest that they had, or implications or dreams that for them were quite important. You only study certain aspects. So it's like there is this kind of sanitization, this sanitizing of thinkers from the past, or physicists or philosophers, in a way where the esoteric component tends to be rejected, bracketed, you know, put in brackets, and just neglected. And then the other elements that fit more the a positivistic, rationalistic paradigm tend to be included and emphasized, to the point where it seems like there's the only thing that is there when it comes to that philosopher or physicist or thinker. Yeah, I'm going on a tangent now. But yeah, the answer is that when it comes to demonization of the horned god by Christianity, it is mainly something that has been purported by Margaret Murray in her work that was a theoretical foundation for Wicca, and has been since then disproved historically. However, that doesn't mean that there haven't been horned gods, you know, gods that have some resemblance to animals that have horns, that have been demonized by Christianity or other religions, or even other pagan religions. That has happened throughout history, but I wouldn't say it is one specific entity called the horned god. That's what I mean. As I hope it makes sense. Nick Tillman says, I think the antidote to cultural appropriation is to honor the culture that gave birth to the tradition. You can't have the tradition and not embrace the people. Yeah, that's a very good point, Nick. Gypsy Firefly says, hi Angela, love your channel. Thank you very much. Do you just study all subjects of occultism academically, or do you also practice? That is a secret. I don't really share publicly whether I am a practitioner or not. So my public message is on the academic side of it. So whether I am practitioner or not doesn't play into the picture. Yeah, it doesn't really play a role in the in my work as an academic, you know, in universities when I go and write papers or do lectures, or here on the YouTube channel. I just chose to keep that for myself and people close to me, of course. Davlavi says, if you have a link to the lecture on cultural appropriation you referenced, yeah, I will try and put it in the info box. If I forget, write a comment so that I remember about it. Joao says, on D&D, I'm musing on Platonism, Demiurge, and the Platonic solids, dice shapes. Yeah, I wish I knew more about D&D so that I could sort of comment on that, but unfortunately I don't. But I find it attractive, you know, the whole world of D&D and role-playing and even cosplaying. I don't know why I associated the two, but maybe the geek word, kind of the geek word. I've always had friends that were geeks, And I was kind of a geek, but a study geek. So maybe a nerd it's the right term. But yeah, I've always been surrounded by people that belong to those communities. But I wouldn't say that I'm a geek myself, I'm afraid. I might become one. I just might. Oh, Swan says, I would love to hear about the Pennsylvania Dutch and powwow. Yeah, that would be also quite interesting, actually. I think that maybe my PhD supervisor has done something on the powwow. I have to ask her. Maybe she has some lead that I can follow about that. Because she has studied traditions in the US. Although she specializes more in indigenous people and indigenous traditions. So let me see if there are other questions. So Andrew Penner is asking, would you ever do a video on psychology of magic, i.e. how it works neurologically? Or do you think that would alienate your viewership, which seems to be largely made of adherents? I'm not sure there would be psychology. Maybe it's neurobiology, the way what you expressed in the content of your question sounds more like neurobiology and neurophysiology of the practice of magic. I do have a video on psychology and magic. Oh, thank you so much for your donation, Gypsy Firefly. So I have an interview with Shannet Sonnet on psychology and paganism, I think it's called. It is something like that. And she addresses a study in psychology and some healing practices. So you might want to check that one out. As for the neurobiology of magic, no, I'm never afraid to alienate my viewership, to be frank. I expect that my viewers want to have, if they are here and they like my work, I'm assuming that, they like the academic research on the matter. And it's not about having somebody that tells you that all of your beliefs are correct. I think that there is a distinction to be made between knowledge and beliefs. I may very well believe something that, has not been proven. I think that the realm of belief doesn't necessarily have to be associated with the realm of empirical knowledge. But yeah, it would be interesting to make a video on the matter. I'm not sure there is scholarship or there are studies on the matter. And also I'm not a neurobiologist. So it would be interesting to get somebody, perhaps an expert on the channel on the matter, if I do find that there is some scholarship on the topic. So Edward Iglesias is asking, is there a sort of organizational chart showing the descent of traditions, kind of like linguistic variations? So Gardner, Alexandrian, and so on. Oh, that's a good question, Edward. I don't think so. I think that you can make a chart. I mean, I have seen lots of these charts on books made by practitioners, not on books or not on academic books or academic publications. I'm trying to think whether it would even be feasible to do something like that. I think you can do that with Wicca, for instance. It's more difficult, but the thing is that since practitioners often have a perennialistic approach to their practice, perennialism means that practitioners tend to find, similarities across different cultures and assimilate cultural variations to see an underlying truth behind all of the differences created by the different ages and the different cultures and the different traditions. So the perennialist approach is that of people that tend to associate, for instance, deities from completely different cultures, from completely different ages, and tend to associate practices from different countries and different ages because they bear some resemblance, and so they say that it's the same thing with a different name. And this is kind of the opposite of what academia does. So I have seen a lot of these charts in books made by practitioners to delineate, of course, their practices going back to Egypt, because that's every single thing comes, derives from the Egyptians, the tarot, the chaos magic, everything. Or shamanism, I think that the two are the main sources of every single esoteric knowledge, either shamanism or the Egyptians. I think that up until recently it was the Egyptians. Now shamanism is the source of the proto-religious form, and so it comes before everything else. That's of course the practitioner's view. I'm not saying that that is the case from an academic perspective. So I think that's why it would be difficult to have a chart, at least if you think of a chart like that on a wider spectrum. I think that you can create an accurate chart of that sort academically if you were to restrict it to one specific tradition and in a very limited amount of time. So for instance, Wicca in the 20th and 21st century, you could do that, I think. But sort of tracing back, tarot cards and other practices that have had many ramifications, some of which are quite difficult to pinpoint and locate. In that case, I guess it would be more difficult. But I think it would be useful to do something like that. Maybe it would require lots more, many more charts that one may imagine, but it could be useful. Oh, Joao says it's Warhammer 40,000. Oh, that's cool. Hank is asking, have you looked at how music and sound have developed for use in magic and mysticism? Oh, that's quite interesting, and there are definitely traditions in magic. I'm thinking about Tantra here, especially Shaiva Tantra. I remember when I was studying Sanskrit at the University of Naples, my professor, who has translated many Sanskrit texts and specializes in Shaiva Tantra, there were some texts that he was translating called the Spandakarika, which means the rooms of sound, literally. So these are texts that are based on the power of sound in a mystical sense. And you do have a lot of that across different traditions. The first one that comes to mind is Tantra, because I remember my professor studying that and we studying that in class. And the idea that there are certain sounds that are more connected to the vibration of creation. And so when you reproduce those sounds and you have to reproduce them in a very specific way, you get attuned with the vibration of the creation. So that's why, for instance, a sound that is often used in meditation, which comes from Indian traditions. Oh, sorry, technical issue. Sorry, I'm back. There was a technical issue. Basically, my battery died out, and I had to, make a new one in the camera. But so as I was saying, there are many traditions where, and the one that comes to mind, there are traditions from India. But also other traditions across the world. But I'm most familiar with the Indian traditions that talk about how sound affects your mystic path and how you attune with creation. So they can have different purposes. So you can get attuned with the vibration of creation, because you want to sort of become a god, in a left-hand path, where one of the aims is to become a living god in a way, or it could be the case that you want to get in tune with God, with godness, the deity. I don't want to use necessarily the male gendered term for God. I mean the deity, the divine. Although in Shaiva Tantra they would say the Lord or God, because the deity that encompasses everything is Shiva in that case. But it's different from monotheism. It's not the same as Christianity. Christianity is monotheistic, which means that there is only one God that is transcendent, that he has created us and we stay here, divided somehow from the divine. Whereas the Shaiva Tantra in Shivaism, you have the idea that Shiva, it's a monistic religion in that sense, which means that Shiva is one god, but is the one thing that encompasses everything. So I'm also Shiva. It's not the case that Shiva has created everything and is transcendent, stays outside of the creation. Everything is Shiva. So it is a term that is used to identify the divine, of which everybody is comprised, and that comprises everything that is manifested. I hope that makes sense. It's the difference between monism and monotheism. So in that sense, you can use certain sounds to attune with different vibrations of creation, whether it is the creative vibration, or whether it is the destructive one, or whether it is the transformative one. So depending on the kind of sound that you produce and use in a meditative state, then you can achieve different outcomes. So that's why you often you may have heard of the sound Om, which is used in meditation, that is associated with the manifested word, because the first letter in the Sanskrit alphabet, according to this tradition, the one that is more connected to the source of creation is the sound A. Whereas the last vowel that is a bit further away from, in terms of, if you imagine creation in a Neoplatonic way, where you have the source of creation, and then the more you move away from the source of creation, the more the vibration gets material and gets into the manifested word, as opposed to the non-manifested. You have the U sound. The U sound is a bit closer to the manifested word. And then you have the M sound, which represents, in the Western esoteric Kabbalistic perception would be Malkut, the Sephirot Malkut, the grounding one. So Om is a combination of the sound A, U, M, and it creates which is supposed to be, pronounced by using the diaphragm. If you have studied singing, if you have some singing training, you would be able to do that. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. But Hank, we can talk about that in our next meeting, because Hank is a patron, and we do one-to-one conversations. Oflameo says, have you read Fictional Theism by Roy Sorsin? No, I haven't, but it sounds interesting. So maybe put it down in the comment section when the stream ends, because I think it'd be interesting to look it up. Let me see if there are other questions. Is there esoteric in Buddhism other than the Tibetan stuff? The Tibetan stuff, it's fun. Yes, of course. But I'd say that the most esoteric side of Buddhism is Tantric Buddhism, which is, I'm afraid, Tibetan stuff. I'm thinking whether I'm familiar with any Indian Buddhist tradition that has some clear esoteric. By esoteric, I'm guessing you mean the practice of magic. So if you mean the practice of magic, I think that's only to be found in Tantric Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism. As far as I know, I cannot really recall any Indian tradition that has magic. Yeah, because Tantra is very magical. Even yoga, we tend to think of yoga as something a bit different here in the Western world, but yoga also has a magical element, a component of magic. The difference between yoga and Tantra is that with yoga, the idea is that you can develop the siddhi, which are the superhuman powers, by following your spiritual path. So it's not something that you seek, it's something that will happen regardless. If you follow your spiritual path and you advance towards your spiritual path, inevitably you will develop this siddhi and these sort of magical powers. So in yoga, it's not something that you seek, and yoga tends to be more focused on control, on controlling the mind, whereas Tantra is more about transgressing. And in Tantra, you do have the purposeful, intentional seeking of magical practices and magical abilities. So that's the difference, I'd say, that in Tantra practitioners actually want to develop magical skills, whereas in yoga it's considered to be something that will happen as a byproduct of your spiritual development. Yeah, of course Tantra is quite complex. I cannot really summarize it, because you have tantric traditions that are very I wouldn't quite say ascetic, but more based on meditative practices. You have meditative practices across the board, but it's not like magic and concrete material achievements is the aim of all forms of Tantra. It really depends on the tradition. Depending on the tradition, you may have some that are more transcendental or more focused on the spiritual side, spiritual development, and others, and becoming one with the essence of God, and other traditions that are more focused on developing a certain relationship with the material world. And there is still quite often the element of becoming a living God in different ways, and in some cases it is more related to the material world. In other cases it is less related to that and more related to becoming one with God in a more mystical sense. Although I don't like to use these terms in a dichotomous way, sort of implying that when something is mystic, it's not necessarily material. I've been studying paganism too long to to endorse that kind of dichotomy, but I know that using that kind of language will make the message better understood. Oh, Marcel Gomez says there is a Shingon and Tendai Buddhism in Japan. So Shingon builds on Tibetan Vajrayana, if I'm not incorrect. I'm not an expert on Japanese and Chinese Buddhism. That's something that I should have premised. So thank you, Marcel Gomez, for saying that, because it reminds me that I sort of assumed that people were asking about Indian and Tibetan Buddhism. But yeah, I have studied more thoroughly Indian and Tibetan traditions when I was at university. So I'm not very familiar with all the traditions in Japanese and Chinese Buddhism. So it could be the case. So thank you, Marcel, for mentioning that. Let me see if there are other questions. Something has been happening in the chat that I didn't quite get. Oh, thank you, Thomas, for your donation and hype emoji. Oh, thank you for saying that I'm awesome. You and Teresa are awesome as well. So let me see if there are other questions. Gothic Extravaganza is asking, what is your opinion on the term magic being used in the application PixArt? I don't understand the question. The use of, I don't own the term magic. I wish I did, but I don't. So I guess that magic is one of those terms that has been used a lot and, is still being used a lot. So that's why Crowley sort of created his own spelling for magic with a K at the end, to sort of distinguish the magic of those who practice it from other forms of magic, whether it be illusionists or other ways of using the term. So I think that I have addressed all the questions, and if I haven't, please feel free to write them in the comment section below, and I will try and answer them. Oh, Casey Rocca says Angela owns the occult. Oh, there's another question from Inquisitor Vex. Do you think modern paganism is under threat from people who want to separate the myths from the people culture and universalize them, versus the myth being interpreted through the cultural lens? I'm not sure I understand the question. Let me read again. So do you think modern paganism is under threat from people who want to separate the myths from the people culture and universalize them? Oh, okay, I understand that. I think I understand. We will see if I understood. So I think that you're asking whether paganism is under threat is a very heavy way of thinking about the future of paganism. Whether disentangling the cultural elements to make a practice universal, whether that compromises paganism. If that is the question, my answer is that it is something that definitely we have seen in shamanism as well. That's why in my research I distinguish between transcultural shamanism and indigenous shamanism. Transcultural shamanism is the kind of shamanism that is not linked to a specific culture or a specific place or initiation or anything like that. It is focused on the techniques, which are transcultural. So regardless of whether you're in Italy or in England or in the US, you will be able to get the same, you are supposed to get the same exact results. Whereas with indigenous traditions, they are quite linked to the community, to the local area, to a specific bloodline tradition. So everything is extremely specific and extremely contextual. So what do I think about the tendency towards transcultural, things becoming more transcultural within paganism? I think that it's inevitable. I think it is inevitable, and I think I don't think that paganism is under threat at all. I think that it is more the case that you will see sort of these different layers of paganism. Maybe layer is not the right term. These different dimensions of paganism, just as much as with shamanism. These different dimensions where you have a more cultural dependent and culture sensitive form of paganism or shamanism, and then you may have a more transcultural form of practice and form of paganism or form of shamanism. I think that there are some people that some practitioners tend to value the technique more, and then the technique becomes, they sort of incorporate techniques based on their personal individual attitude and likings and inclinations. So practitioners that tend to prefer a transcultural approach are those who want to include techniques from different traditions and tailor their own path. So it tends to be an individually tailored approach. Whereas the practitioners that tend to prefer a more cultural specific approach, so for instance indigenous traditions or forms or traditions that are linked to a specific local area, to a specific bloodline, to a specific initiatory tradition, those tend to be practitioners that don't want to individually don't want to tailor the practice upon themselves, but more enter a community, enter a tradition, enter bloodline, enter a specific chain of you have this kind of term in Italian and Spanish, you have the idea of entering a circle of people with specific practices. And so it's not the case that you will adapt your practices to your personal inclinations. It's more the case that you will be initiated in a tradition within a community, and you will have to follow those traditions, follow those specific techniques and ways of doing things, initiatory paths. So I think that is not the case that paganism is under threat. It's more the case that we will keep seeing these two dimensions within paganism, where you have some that is more culture specific and others that are more transcultural in nature. So yeah, I think I have answered all the questions. And I guess we can end the live stream here. So thank you very much everybody for coming over and joining me for this live stream. And whether you are watching it live or watching it afterwards when it is uploaded on my YouTube channel, please don't forget to smash the like button if you liked anything that I said, even one word, I mean, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and yeah, share my videos with your friends and people that might be interested in different topics that I have addressed on my YouTube channel. Now there is quite a variety of topics that I have covered, and as always, I hope you stay tuned for all the academic fun. Bye for now.